It's Sunday morning, and we had our wonderful picnic yesterday, and our annual picnic. We had a wonderful crowd here, and our message is on predestination and the halakah. Predestination and the halakah. And halakah. Now, some of y'all, I'm sure. Is there anybody here who hasn't heard me teach on halakah? Nobody? Okay, we'll be teaching on it. And the halakah is the very revelation of why Jesus was confronting the Pharisees. And it all goes back. In fact, halakah and tongues find their inception back at Israel's history. Everything in the Bible goes back to Israel being involved in Baal and Grove, which was the same thing that was brought in the church and renamed Christ's Mass. Everything goes back to this. Back to that right there. While they were a nation from 1 Samuel through 2 Chronicles, I want to just put something on the board here that show you one of the many things, the way this thing branches. Of course, Israel being a nation goes back to the promise to Abraham, then Isaac, and then Jacob. These are father, son, grandson. And Jacob's name changed to Israel, there in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. And then Jacob have a son named Joseph, and Joseph being sold into bondage, and Israel ends up in bondage for 400 years. They come out of bondage, and they go 40 years in the wilderness, and God gives them a message through Noah. I got Noah taking the law from God. Noah, I think it was Moses. I got it right, didn't I? Moses gets the law from God on Mount Sinai, and God says, I've given Abraham the land, and if you're disobedient to me, and this is in the lineage of Shem, and Shem goes back to Seth, and Seth was the promised lineage of God there in the 5th chapter of Genesis. Now, in 1 Samuel through 2 Chronicles, God tells Israel, if you don't come after me, and you go after other gods, I'll send four judgments, and these 4 judgments will be the sword, and the famine, and the pestilence, and the beast. Of course, the sword that's when God tells Israel, I will bring in your enemies against you, and they will lay siege against you. And that's where you had a city, and they would come in, their armies would surround them on all sides, and they would cut off all the roads that lead into the city, and they would just sit there. A lot of times they would besiege the city for as long as a year and a half, and they would cause the people to starve to the point that as their children begin to die there in Israel, God said, I'll cause you to eat your children there in the 19th chapter of Jeremiah. And that's exactly what he did. And they did that in the 6th chapter of 2 Kings. They began to eat their children. Well, that is certainly the sword, and that's coupled with the famine. And sometimes he'd bring the famine that way, and sometimes he'd bring the famine like he did with Elijah, when he said there'll be no rain for 3.5 years there in the 18th chapter of 1 Kings, because Ahab and Jezebel is bringing this system into Israel there in these kings. This is all the kings of Israel. Here's Saul, David, Solomon, and then the kingdom split because Solomon allowed his wives to go after all these Baal and Grove and Shemosh and Molech and the rest of those tree and sun goddesses. So God splits the nation in two, splits it into northern Israel and southern Judah. And we've all gone through that. Northern Israel, finally God gets fed up because Israel keeps going after Baal, which was Hercules, and his birthday is December the 25th. And the reason for that, of course, is that the sun, we just had the summer solstice. Do y'all realize that? Do you know that's why it was hot yesterday? We had the summer solstice, and because of the way the earth sets on its axis, and it moves up on its axis and goes around the sun, the earth, of course they didn't know that back among the pagans, And the longest days of the year is June. The longest day is June the 21st, and that's called the summer solstice. Summer solstice, S-O-L-S-T-I-C-E. And you can always remember these solstices and the equinoxes. They'll be 3 months apart. And always remember 21st. Well, when you get down here to September, 21st, 22nd, and they'll always put it 21st, 22nd because we got 365 days in our year. The Jews had 360. And we're not going to talk about how they made it up in the leap years and all that right now. I do that in the teaching of the 70 weeks of Daniel. But you'll notice that the summer solstice is called on the 21st of June. Then 3 months later, on 21st, 22nd September, comes the autumn equinox. And equinox means equal night. It means there's 12 hours in the day, 12 hours in the night. So you have equal night here, and that's the autumn equinox. And then you get to the winter solstice. Winter solstice, this is the longest nights of the year. And the longest nights, this is where the pagans said they had to get from October down to spring in April, May. Spring in April, May. And they said, in order to have crops, this was the cold of the winter, especially in those the Scandinavian world where they had the worship of the trees. They said that the fir trees were magical because they could live through that sub-zero weather. So the winter solstice was the longest nights, and they said the sun was burning out because the sun was waning. It was the earth turning on its axis, going around the sun. Well, they thought it was the sun. They thought the earth was sitting in one spot, and there's a big turtle or Hercules was holding the earth up. And they thought the sun was moving away from the earth, so they had to appeal to the father of the sun gods, which was Hercules and Adonis and all these fire deities and all of these different city-states. So they had to appeal to the father of the gods, Saturn, and they had that feast of Saturn, or the Saturnalia. I'll get it right in a minute. You are in. I'm thinking too far ahead. So they had to appeal to Saturn, and they had this feast in Rome from December the 17th through the 24th in order to appeal to the Father of the Sun to appease him, to make him come back and give the earth heat so they could have their crops in the spring. Well, of course, immediately thereafter, isn't it amazing? 3 days later, 3 days, like Jesus was resurrected the third day, but they took a full 3 days, and 3 days later they come up and they said, on the 25th, that will be the birth of the unconquerable sun, and December the 25th was his birthday, and the sun began to brighten again till they got to the spring, and you got to the spring equinox, and the spring equinox was on March the 21st, and all of these are 3 months apart. They're 3 months apart. Remember 21st. Just remember June, September, and then December, and then March. 3 months apart, 21st, other than the fact of 21st, 22nd in September, October, because of the number of days of the year. Well, of course, this is the system that Constantine brought in the church, renamed Christ Mass. Christ Mass, and it's the same exact system that Israel was involved in, called Baal in the Grove. Baal was Hercules, Grove was Venus, the tree deity, and Baal was the sun deity. And they went after this worship when Ahab marries Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, the prince of Tyre, which is directly above Israel. We call that Lebanon today. Now, I'm just repainting this very quickly so I can show you something on the board that we need to be seeing. I'm not going to go into this in detail, just a very quick